Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits of the Week video. I thought I would mix one of these in while I was finalizing the entries for your latest cryptids and monster suggestions. This one was actually suggested in that set of videos, but in looking at it, sure enough, it does seem like this is more on the Ghosts and Spirits side, but it really caught my eye when I was looking at the information of this. I mean, this is like almost like a movie is just begging to be made out of this particular ghost. It's a very, very distinct looking ghost too. I mean, you see something like this, it'll essentially make a very lasting impression. It has to do with a ghost that's found in Japan, or in the fields at least of Japan, and it's known as this, the Gashadokuro. Hope I'm saying that correctly, but that is the name associated with it. So let's go ahead, let's talk about all the interesting, fascinating information with this particular ghost. You're looking at it now. Instantly, it makes an impression, doesn't it? It's basically a gigantic skeleton, something that is far larger than, let's say, your average skeleton, and it roams the nights there in Japan. So this Gashadokuro, first let's talk about its characteristics, and then I'll focus on its origin, because there's some weird history associated with its origin where it makes it seem like it's both ancient times, its origin, and then far more recent times instead. So I'll hold off on that in a few minutes. But first off, this Gashadokuro, yes, it's basically a skeletal giant. It's a ghost. The way they call it there, it's a yokai. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but it's in other words a ghost or some kind of phantom associated there in Japanese mythology. Whatever this thing is, it's many times the size of your average skeleton, and it basically walks around the nights there in Japan. You can see it usually from well, actually you can't, because the thing is, this thing is invisible, but whenever it does make its appearance known, that's what it looks like. The average size is about 15 times larger than your average skeleton, and all it is essentially just a gigantic skeleton roaming after midnight. It drinks and eats people. That's its main thing too. So this is not something that you want to necessarily be around whenever it's roaming those those long fields out there at night. So it'll basically go and just grab these lone travelers, whoever it happens to come across. You can't see it though, because this thing has invisibility and is basically indestructible. So the only recourse that you have, the only thing that allows you to, I guess, get a preview of its nearby vicinity, is you'll hear this loud ringing in your ear. Imagine, like, let's say if there was a loud explosion nearby and then you hear that ringing afterward. That's how I imagine that sound is. Also, you can kind of hear it coming up on you, because those bones, while it makes up obviously its entire body, it's a weakness of some kind too, because it'll rattle the bones with some kind of sound. And like if you imagine, like, let's say a scary type movie that showcases skeletons walking around and then having that chitter chatter type sound within the bones of the skeletons, that's how I imagine this thing does as well. But yes, it'll essentially roam those long nights, and the reason for it is because it's a vengeful ghost. This is a ghost that hasn't had a good experience. Basically, all those skeletons within it's all made up of a large number of people that died in a gruesome fashion. Either people that died, let's say, from famine, which is one of the worst ways to die, because you're slowly dying and basically going through a lot of pain at the same time. And then others that have died, let's say, in the fields of war. So there they are, fighting for some cause, fighting for some battle, and then it turns out that they end up dying in the field, but they don't get a proper burial. Like, they're just basically left as is. I'm sure you and I have seen pictures of that kind of horrific way to go, where a lot of times after these battles are done, there's just no finalization that can be done when it comes to getting these bodies. They're just basically left out there to rot. And you can imagine that in some of those cases, not all those people died instantly. So some of them ended up dying slowly out there in the field too. That's essentially what this Gashadokuro is made up of. Victims of famine, victims of war, both of them dying a slow death, and then having so much hatred because of what occurred to them that somehow, in some manner, once they died, this energy within them all went into one place, and all the, I guess, the physical attributes of them, in this case their remaining skeletal bodies, were also able to fuse together under one place, and then they were all reborn as this gigantic skeleton. And with this anger essentially fueling it for a long time, this thing in this Gashadokuro can last a very long time itself. All it does is it feeds off of, like I was telling earlier, off of these lone travelers, whoever it comes across, but it doesn't seem like to do it out of hunger per se. It just seems to do it out of vengeance. So it'll feed off of people, it'll grab them, bite their head off, drink their blood, and then it'll just move on to the next victim. And then after a long time, long time in this case, the idea is eventually their own energy, the malice within them, will just be completely depleted. And once that happens, then it seems like this Gashadokuro will finally have a final resting point. But the idea is that it takes a very long time for that to happen. Because if you go back to some of the origins associated with this, some of these have Gashadokuro have been around for a long time, over 1,000 years, in fact. And that brings me back to what I was stating earlier. So it seems like there was a tale of a samurai named Taira no Masakata, and somewhere along that tale, his daughter was someone that was a sorceress. She was able to continue his cause after he died, I guess in some battle, and when that happened, she summoned a great skeleton made up, in this case, of the skeletons of other people that died, and that was apparently the origin of the Gashadokuro. So that's one stance, a much older stance, in other words. But then another origin places it actually at a much closer time period, in this case to the mid-20th century, because the first known printed appearance of this Gashadokuro has to do with a book called The World's Bizarre Thriller, Complete Works 2, and it has a subtitle, Monsters of the World. It seems like the person that created this, someone, Shigeaki Yamuchi, made this because they were gathering almost like an encyclopedia of these weird monsters found throughout the world, and one of the entries was this Gashadokuro. That's the first known printed entry anywhere, essentially. But the fact that it's just the first printed appearance does not mean that it has been talked about before. So that's why when I was reading the other bit of information about this being over 1,000 years old or so, it did make more sense to me that this would be a much longer history in terms of this ghost, the spirit, whatever it is, as opposed to something just being created in the 20th century. So, but at least with regards to its first known printed entrance, and then which allowed it to gain more popularity, all these pictures, all these drawings that you're seeing from, it's all thanks to that book, that World's Bizarre Thriller Works 2. But that's it. That's pretty much all the information tied to this very unique ghost, whatever this thing is, this Gashadokuro that roams those nights there in Japan. It's a very visual, arresting visual, because I could totally imagine seeing like a nighttime, just the long set of this beautiful green grass field, whatever it is, that just stretches out to the horizon, and then somewhere in the distance, if you can see it, you can notice this Gashadokuro out there just roaming the fields, and then imagine, like in a strange twist, it turns around from that far distance and looks right at you. Then you know you're in trouble. But again, you might have a disadvantage because this thing is invisible. One more thing too about it: if you do have, let's say, a presence known of this ghost, again, either you can hear that ringing within your ears, that'll tell you, or you can hear the telltale sign of the skeletal parts of it battling against each other. If you know something called a Shinto charm, then you can ward it off. So I have no idea what that is, the Shinto charm. Someone might have to point it out to me or to others out there. But if you know this, then that's when you'll have a safe passage, because you can then, I guess, state it several times and you will not have any trouble afterwards. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.